Arab billionaire watches twin girls selling their doll to save their mother. Their lives change forever. In the pouring rain at a once bustling county fair, two small figures huddled under a leaking awning, their shoulders pressed together for warmth. Emma and Sophia Miller, 7-year-old twin girls with matching blue jackets and identical heart-shaped faces, were soaked to the bone. Their matching auburn ponytails hung limp from the relentless drizzle, and their second-hand tennis shoes were darkened with puddle water. Between them, protected from the rain by Emma's school jacket, sat a beautiful antique porcelain doll in an elaborate Victorian dress of faded blue silk. The doll's painted face, with rosebud lips and sapphire eyes, carried the dignified expression of an artifact that had witnessed a century of human triumphs and tragedies. A handwritten cardboard sign, its edges curling from moisture, read, "Vintage doll, $500 for Mom's surgery." The twins had carefully positioned their makeshift stand near the fair entrance that morning, when hope still felt possible. Now, 8 hours later, as the day surrendered to early evening and the rain showed no sign of mercy, that hope flickered like a candle in the wind. "Nobody's even slowing down anymore, Em," whispered Sophia, her small hands red from cold, her usually cheerful voice cracking with disappointment. "We've been here for hours and hours." Emma, the older twin by 12 minutes, a fact she never let her sister forget, squeezed Sophia's shoulder. Unlike her sister, Emma rarely displayed emotion. Even now, as their desperate plan crumbled around them, her face remained a mask of determination. "Someone will come," she insisted, adjusting the plastic tarp they'd salvaged from a discarded carnival booth. "They have to." The determination in her voice didn't match the uncertainty in her eyes. Sophia caught this contradiction. The twins often sensed each other's true feelings beneath words, but said nothing. Someone had to believe, and today it was Emma's turn to be the strong one. Across the fairground, the last food vendors closed their stalls. The smell of fried dough and caramel apples, tortures to the hungry girls, faded under the pervasive scent of wet asphalt. The tinny carousel music, which had provided a surreal soundtrack to their vigil, finally silenced, leaving only the steady drumming of rain and occasional thunder. "Maybe we could ask for less money," Sophia suggested, her voice small. "Like 300? Emma shook her head firmly. "Dr. Reynolds said the special medicine costs at least 800 plus the hospital fees. We already have 200 saved from our birthday money and Mom's jar." Sophia's stomach growled audibly. They hadn't eaten since the peanut butter sandwiches Aunt Linda had made them for breakfast, before dropping them at the school bus stop, believing they were actually going to school, not skipping to come to the fair. "When Mom gets better," Emma continued, almost to herself, "she'll go back to teaching art classes. Remember how she used to come home with paint on her hands? Even her fingernails would be different colors." Sophia smiled at the memory. "Blue and yellow, and sometimes purple, and she'd chase us around the apartment, threatening to turn us into living paintings if we didn't clean our room." The shared recollection warmed them momentarily, before reality settled back like the damp chill in their bones. Half a mile across town, in the sterile confines of Community Hospital, Sarah Miller lay in bed 307, pale against white sheets that had been washed so many times they had lost all softness. Medical monitors beeped steadily beside her, the electronic pulse a poor substitute for the healthy heartbeat that her body was struggling to maintain. A young nurse adjusted her IV drip without making eye contact, already behind schedule on her rounds. Sarah's fingers, once steady enough to create detailed watercolor illustrations for children's books, now trembled as she folded a delicate paper crane. A half-finished collection of origami animals decorated her bedside table. Blue for Emma, pink for Sophia, waiting for the twins' weekend visit. The late afternoon sun briefly penetrated the clouds, casting a golden rectangle across her hospital bed. In this momentary illumination, The hollowness of her cheeks and the premature lines around her eyes became more apparent. At 35, Sarah looked a decade older, the aggressive medication having exacted its price on her once vibrant beauty. Dr. Reynolds entered, clipboard in hand, his face carrying the professionally neutral expression that doctors perfect over years of delivering difficult news. "Ms. Miller, about the specialist consultation," he began. "I've got 2 jobs and amazing kids, doctors." "Reynolds," Sarah interrupted, her voice stronger than her body suggested, "what I don't have is better insurance or a miracle." The doctor hesitated, then placed a brochure on her bed. The glossy paper featured palm trees and smiling medical professionals. "Medical tourism options," the title read. "The procedure in Boston." He cleared his throat. "There are alternatives. Other countries where the cost would be a fraction." Sarah's fingers crushed the paper crane she'd been folding. "You mean places where the success rate is also a fraction? Where I'd be separated from my girls for months?" "Doctor." Reynolds had the decency to look uncomfortable. "I'm just trying to present all options, Ms. Miller. The specialist treatment protocol has shown promising results, but it costs more than I'll make in 3 years," Sarah finished for him. "I understand, doctor. Believe me, I understand the economics all too well." As he left, Sarah smoothed out the crumpled crane, carefully refolding the paper wings. The small creation took on additional weight in her hands, a symbol of hope, folded from the very paperwork that documented her diminishing options. Back at the fairground, the rain intensified, pelting the nearly abandoned stalls with cold determination. Lightning flashed in the distance, followed by rolling thunder. Emma counted silently. 1,000 to 1,000, reaching 7 before the thunder arrived. "The storm's getting closer," she said, mathematical even in crisis. Sophia wiped water from the doll's porcelain face with her sleeve, her movements gentle and reverent despite her exhaustion. "I'm sorry, Evangeline," she whispered to the doll, as if it were a living being who could feel the indignity of being displayed for sale in the rain. "I've got you." She carefully tucked a stray thread back into the doll's lace collar, smoothing the worn blue fabric with fingers that had inherited her mother's artistic touch. The porcelain face stared back, frozen in a perpetual expression of serene dignity that seemed to transcend their desperate circumstances. "Remember how Great-Grandma Rose carried you all the way from Europe?" Sophia continued her one-sided conversation with the doll. "Mom said she wouldn't leave without you, even when they barely had room for clothes." Emma watched her sister with a mixture of annoyance and envy. Sophia had always been able to escape into imagination, to find comfort in make-believe. Emma, by contrast, lived firmly in reality, where dolls were objects and fairy tales never materialized when you needed them most. "The ship was so crowded," Sophia continued, now fully immersed in the family story they'd heard countless times. "And there were soldiers everywhere. But Great-Grandma hid you inside her coat, all the way across the ocean." Emma adjusted the doll's tiny bonnet, her fingertips lingering on the faded blue ribbon despite herself. "War brides had priority," she added, joining the story despite her practical nature. "That's the only reason they let her on the ship," Sophia nodded, pleased that her sister was participating. "And then the hurricane came, and Great-Grandpa had to tie them both to the mast so they wouldn't wash overboard." Emma rolled her eyes. "That part's not true, Soph. Mom was just making the story more exciting." "Is too true," Sophia insisted. "Why would Mom lie about something like that?" "Adults always embellish stories for kids," Emma replied, with the world-weary wisdom of a child who has discovered that Santa Claus isn't real, but protects her sibling from the truth. Their minor squabble was interrupted by another roll of thunder, this one directly overhead, making both girls jump. The flash and boom were simultaneous now. No time to count between them. Sophia clutched Evangeline tighter, seeking comfort from the inanimate object. "Some things keep families together," she recited softly, "even when everything falls apart." Emma looked at her sister with surprise. "You remember Mom saying that?" Sophia nodded. "The night she went to the hospital the first time, when she let us hold Evangeline." Emma recalled that night with perfect clarity, their mother's face, unnaturally pale even then, the ambulance lights reflecting off the apartment windows, Aunt Linda arriving in her nurse's scrubs, still smelling of hospital antiseptic. Before the paramedics took her away, Sarah had retrieved the doll from its place of honor on the shelf, placing it in their small hands with uncharacteristic solemnity. "Take care of each other," she had told them, "and take care of Evangeline. She's watched over our family for generations." A group of teenagers hurried past, laughing and shoving each other, hunched against the rain. One knocked into their table, causing the doll to nearly fall. Emma caught it with a gasp, cradling it protectively against her chest. Water dripped from her hair onto the doll's dress, leaving dark spots on the faded fabric. "Sorry," one teenager called out, not bothering to stop. "Who brings a doll to a fair anyway?" Another commented to his friend's voice carrying through the rain. "Bunch of weirdos." Their laughter faded as they ran toward the parking lot, leaving the twins alone with their wounded pride and increasingly desperate situation. Emma straightened Evangeline's dress with shaking hands, checking for damage. "Don't listen to them," she whispered to the doll, momentarily adopting her sister's habit of treating it as a sentient being. "They don't understand what you've seen." The remaining fairgoers hurried past, collars turned up against the worsening weather. An elderly couple slowed briefly, the woman's eyes softening as she glanced at the doll and the bedraggled girls. She reached into her purse, but her husband gently took her elbow, steering her away. "They're probably running some kind of scam, Martha," he said, voice low but still audible. "Kids these days will do anything for money." The woman allowed herself to be led away, looking back with apologetic eyes that offered no real help. Ethan bit his lip hard, leaving teeth marks in the soft flesh. "Everyone thinks we're lying," she whispered. "We're not," Emma replied fiercely. "Mom really is sick." "I know that," Sophia snapped, uncharacteristic irritation flaring. "But they don't believe us." Emma's shoulders slumped in rare defeat. "Maybe. We should just go. We can try the weekend flea market." "They charge for tables there," Sophia reminded her. $20. We don't have enough for that, and bus fare to the hospital tomorrow." The practical obstacle silenced them both. Emma looked down at their meager collection box. Only a few dollars in singles and quarters, plus a Canadian coin some jokester had tossed in. Nowhere near enough. "What are we going to tell Mom?" Sophia asked, voice small. Emma squared her shoulders, summoning the determination that defined her. "That we'll find another way. We always do." 30 yards away, parked discreetly under a maple tree whose branches provided minimal shelter from the downpour, a sleek black Tesla Model S idled, its electric engine producing only a faint hum that was lost beneath the drumming rain. Through the tinted window, Farid Haddad watched the twins with an intensity that would have unsettled them had they noticed his scrutiny. At 58, Farid carried his age with the confident dignity of a man accustomed to commanding rooms and closing deals worth hundreds of millions. His manicured fingers tapped against a leather portfolio embossed with the logo of Crescent Investment Partners. Deep lines framed his eyes, crevices carved by time, loss, and the weight of decisions that affected thousands of lives. He wore an impeccably tailored Tom Ford suit that contrasted sharply with the casual attire of the departing fairgoers. In the driver's seat, Asim Rahman, Farid's personal assistant and driver for the past 12 years, adjusted the climate control and glanced at his employer in the rearview mirror. The detour to this small Michigan town had not been on their itinerary, and they were now significantly behind schedule. "Sir," Asim ventured carefully, "your conference call with the Dubai investors starts in 20 minutes. Mr. Al-Mansouri specifically requested your presence, and the team is already assembled in the conference room." Farid nodded distractedly, his attention never leaving the two small figures huddled under the leaking awning. "Yes," he replied, his accent slight but distinctive, the cultured English of an international businessman layered over the melodic cadences of his native. Arabic. The PR team has prepared your statement about the hospital wing donation, Asim continued, scrolling through the calendar on his tablet. And your flight to Riyadh is confirmed for tomorrow evening. The Crown Prince's office sent the final agenda this morning. Again, Farid barely acknowledged the information, his dark eyes fixed on the scene across the fairground. He watched as Emma carefully adjusted the doll's dress after the teenager's careless jostling, her movements gentle despite her obvious exhaustion. Something in their determined stance, their refusal to abandon their post despite the clear futility of their efforts, triggered a memory he had spent years trying to bury. "Shall I drive on, sir?" Asim asked after a moment of silence. "The rain is getting worse, and we have a 40-minute drive to the airport." Farid didn't answer immediately. Through the rain-streaked window, he observed a fair official in a plastic poncho approaching the twins, clipboard in hand. The man's body language, impatient, authoritative, suggested he was about to ask them to pack up and leave. Before he could make a conscious decision, Farid was reaching for the door handle. "Wait here," he instructed Asim, whose eyebrows rose in surprise. "Sir, your shoes—" Asim began, but Farid was already stepping out into the downpour. The rain immediately assaulted his uncovered head, plastering his silver-streaked black hair to his scalp. His Italian leather Oxfords sank into a puddle, water seeping through the fine stitching to soak his silk socks. The Brioni cashmere overcoat he wore, which had kept Desert Shield generals warm during night strategy sessions, darkened as raindrops penetrated the expensive fabric. Yet Farid noticed none of this as he made his way purposefully across the muddy ground. His focus remained entirely on the twins, who were now listening to the fair official with matching expressions of resignation. "Closing in 15 minutes, the man was saying as Farid approached. "Can't have minors unattended after hours. It's a liability issue." "We're waiting for our aunt," Emma lied smoothly. "She's coming to pick us up." The official looked skeptical. "You've been here all day, kiddo. Rules are rules." A shadow fell across their table as Farid stepped under the awning, water splashing, as his expensive shoes entered another puddle, without concern for their cost. All three turned to look at him, the twins with wary curiosity, the official with the automatic deference that wealth commands even when unannounced. "I believe these young ladies are conducting business," Farid said, his voice carrying the quiet authority of someone unaccustomed to being questioned. "Perhaps they could have a few more minutes to conclude their transaction," the fair official straightened unconsciously, responding to the unmistakable air of command. "Of course, sir. Just making sure everything's in order." He retreated hastily, glancing back with undisguised curiosity. Farid now stood before the twins, raindrops continuing to darken his expensive cashmere coat. His commanding presence seemed out of place amid the shabbiness of the fair's remains, like a lion wandering into a barnyard. He studied the doll without speaking, his expression unreadable. "This doll has been in your family long?" he finally asked, his accent giving the simple question an exotic gravity. Emma straightened, suddenly protective. She unconsciously shifted the doll slightly away from him, a mother hen guarding her chick. "Since our great-grandmother," she answered, wary but maintaining the dignity that was her shield against the world. "She's not just a doll," Farid nodded thoughtfully. "Few things worth having are just anything." Something in his tone, respect rather than condescension, made Emma relax slightly, unlike the fairgoers who had passed by all day. His gaze held genuine interest rather than dismissive pity. His eyes lingered on the hospital name scribbled in the corner of their sign, Community Hospital, the same facility visible on the hill, overlooking the small town. "Are you interested in buying her, sir?" Sophia asked, hope brightening her voice for the first time in hours. Farid looked from the doll's face to the twins. He noticed Emma's hand resting protectively on the doll's shoulder, how her thumb absently stroked the worn fabric in an unconscious gesture of comfort-seeking. "She seems special," he said with genuine interest, rather than adult condescension. "Tell me about her." He was not merely humoring them. There was something in his expression that suggested he understood the weight of what they were selling, not just a valuable antique, but a piece of their history, their identity. "Her name is Evangeline," Emma explained, warming slightly but keeping her guard up. "She's from Vienna. Great-Grandma Rose brought her when she came to America in 1939. She was Jewish," Sophia added, the gravity of this historical detail beyond her full comprehension. "She had to leave in a hurry. Evangeline was the only toy she could bring. She's survived 2 floods and a house fire," Emma continued, cataloging the doll's resilience with obvious pride. "Mom says she's lucky, that she protects our family." Fareed listened attentively, his gaze occasionally returning to the doll's painted features. A thoughtful crease formed between his eyebrows. "And yet you're willing to part with her," he observed softly. It wasn't a question, but an acknowledgment of sacrifice. The twins exchanged glances, a silent conversation between sisters who shared more than just identical features. Something passed between them, an entire dialogue compressed into a moment of eye contact. "We don't want to," Emma admitted finally, her voice tight with suppressed emotion. "But Mom needs—" She trailed off, unable to finish the sentence. Her eyes glistened with unshed tears that she blinked away rapidly, unwilling to show weakness. "It's her heart," Sophia explained, filling the silence her sister left. "She needs a special operation, but our insurance won't pay. They said it's experimental, but Dr. Reynolds said it's her best chance." Her small hands clenched into fists by her sides, anger at the injustice momentarily overcoming her sadness. "The medicine costs $800 just for one treatment," Emma added, having composed herself. "Plus hospital fees." She lifted her chin defiantly, summoning dignity beyond her years. "We're not asking for charity. Evangeline is worth way more than $500. We checked online. Victorian porcelain dolls from Europe can go for thousands." In her voice was the fierce pride of someone who has nothing left but their self-respect, and who guards it all the more jealously for that reason. Fareed studied them for a long moment, taking in their matching, determined expressions, the protective way they flanked the doll, the exhaustion evident in their slumped shoulders despite their attempt to stand tall. "I'm sure she is worth much more," he said finally, a small smile softening the habitual sternness of his features, both in dollars and in meaning. He reached into his coat and pulled out a leather wallet, the movement deliberate, almost ceremonial. The twins' eyes widened, hope battling with the fear of disappointment they had become too familiar with. In that moment, a memory surfaced in Fareed's mind, another child's face, another desperate hope, another moment when money, which he had, in abundance, should have been the simplest solution. But last time, he had been too late. This time would be different. Later that evening, Fareed's Tesla moved silently through the rain-slick streets of the small town, wipers creating a hypnotic rhythm against the windshield. Street lamps cast intermittent golden glow across the leather interior, briefly illuminating the case beside him, where Evangeline now rested. Through the windshield, he watched the twins enter a small apartment building with peeling paint and missing shingles. They had insisted on finding their own way home, on standing at the bus stop in the rain rather than accepting his offer of a ride. Their independence, their wariness of strangers despite their desperate circumstances, had further impressed him. Now, from a distance, he observed them counting out bus fare with small fingers, their movements visible through the glass doors of the building's lobby. Their identical blue jackets disappeared up a stairwell, but not before he caught a glimpse of their reluctant backward glance toward the street where his car was parked. They could not know he was still watching, that he had followed them home not out of any sinister motive, but from a compulsion he himself did not fully understand. Asim, in the driver's seat, wisely maintained silence, though Farid could sense his curiosity about the day's unexpected detour and the antique doll now occupying space in the car's luxurious interior. The scene before him, children in need, a mother's illness, a desperate sacrifice, triggered a cascade of memories, pulling him back 7 years to another hospital, another child, another desperate attempt to bargain with fate. Flashback, Int, private hospital room, Dubai, 7 years ago. A younger Farid sat beside a hospital bed where a young girl, Layla, Monday 9, lay connected to machines whose beeping provided a sterile soundtrack to his vigil. The room was private and well-appointed, the best that money could buy, but no amount of luxury could mask its essential purpose or soften the clinical reality of the medical equipment sustaining his daughter's life. Layla's face, though pale, maintained the ethereal beauty she had inherited from her mother. Dark lashes rested against her cheeks as she dozed fitfully, momentarily escaping the pain that plagued her waking hours. Her small fingers clutched a carved wooden camel toy that Farid had bought her from a street vendor on their last trip to his childhood village. The Middle Eastern hospital was modern and state-of-the-art, with equipment newly imported from Germany and a staff of internationally trained specialists. Yet, for all its technological advancement, it had reached the limits of what it could offer his daughter. Dr. Mahmoud, a respected cardiologist in his 60s, spoke quietly to Farid near the doorway, his voice low to avoid waking the sleeping. "Child, there is a specialist in Germany who has had success with this particular condition," the doctor explained in Arabic. "Dr. Muller has developed a new protocol specifically for cases like Layla's. But," he hesitated, meeting Farid's eyes, "with the gravity of a man delivering difficult news, we would need to move quickly." "Very quickly," Farid nodded, his expression revealing nothing of the turmoil beneath. As one of the region's most successful businessmen, he had perfected the art of impassivity in the face of crisis. "Make the arrangements," he instructed. "Whatever. The cost. Charter a medical transport plane if necessary." "I've already contacted his office," Dr. Mahmoud replied. "They can fit her in next week, but Layla would need to be stable enough for the journey." As if on cue, Farid's phone rang, the screen lighting up with his COO's number. A $1 billion deal was in its final stages, a merger that would consolidate Crescent Investments' position as the dominant financial player in the Gulf. He glanced at the device, hesitating. Layla's eyes fluttered open, catching the moment of indecision. "Go ahead, Babet," she said, her voice weak but carrying the innate dignity she had inherited from him. "It's important." Farid silenced the phone, tucking it away. "Nothing is more important than you, Habibti," he assured her, smoothing a strand of dark hair from her forehead. But we see the conflict in his eyes, the calculation happening despite himself. The merger required his personal attention at this critical juncture. A few hours away at most, he could be back before evening. "I'll just rest anyway," Layla continued, wise beyond her years, already practiced at making things easier for the adults around her. "The medicine makes me sleepy." Still, Farid hesitated, torn between the immediate needs of his child and the empire he had built, an empire that, ironically, he had always justified as creating a legacy for her. A back-to-present into Tesla Farid blinked, returning to the present with an almost physical jolt. Rain drummed against the car roof, creating a cocoon of white noise that had allowed his mind to wander down painful paths. His driver, Asim, glanced in the rearview mirror, concerned by his employer's unusual silence. "Did you say something, sir?" Asim asked carefully. Farid realized he may have spoken aloud, lost in memory. "No," he replied, distracted once again. The controlled businessman rather than the grieving father. He opened the leather case, looking at Evangeline. The doll's blue eyes seemed to stare back at him, knowing and judging. He touched the blue ribbon in her hair, then carefully closed. The case again, his movements gentle despite his large hands. "Shall we head to the airport, sir?" Asim inquired, checking his watch. "The jet is fueled for Dubai. Mr. Al-Faisal expects your arrival by morning for the final contract review." Farid didn't answer immediately. He took out his phone, scrolling through missed calls and messages, business that once seemed urgent, now strangely trivial in the wake of his encounter with the twins. The names on his screen represented power brokers, royal family members, and corporate titans whose favor he had spent decades cultivating. Yet in this moment they seemed distant and unimportant. He looked up, staring at the building where the twins had disappeared, its shabbiness accentuated by the gleaming luxury of his vehicle. "No," he said finally, with the quiet certainty that had built his business empire. "I need you to find out everything about a Sarah Miller, Community Hospital, and her children." The command carried an uncharacteristic personal interest. Asim's eyes widened slightly in the rearview mirror, surprise momentarily overtaking his professional composure. "Sir?" he questioned, confused by this deviation from their meticulously planned schedule. "The Dubai meeting with Sheikh Al Nahyan will—" "Wait," Farid cut him off, his tone brooking no argument. "This is more important." The phrase echoed his words to Layla all those years ago, but this time there was no conflict in his expression, no calculation behind his eyes. Asim nodded, though his face revealed concern about this unprecedented deviation from routine. In 12 years, he had never known his employer to postpone a major business meeting for a personal matter. "Yes, sir," he replied, already reaching for his tablet. "I'll make some calls." "And Asim?" Farid added, his voice carrying unusual intensity. "I want her complete medical file. Tonight." He touched the leather case containing Evangeline, then his fingers moved to the inner pocket of his suit jacket, where he kept the worn photograph he had carried every day for 7 years. "This time will be different, Layla," he whispered too, softly for his driver to hear. His fingers touched the photograph in his wallet. His daughter's face, forever frozen at 9 years old, looked back at him with the same trusting eyes as the twins who had just sold their most precious possession in a desperate attempt to save someone they loved. In their small apartment on the 3rd floor of the building Farid was watching, Emma and Sophia Miller had just finished counting their day's earnings on a kitchen table with a wobbly leg stabilized by a folded takeout menu. The modest apartment was clean but worn, with furniture clearly sourced from thrift stores and discount outlets. The walls displayed watercolor paintings, Sarah's work from healthier days, adding splashes of color to the otherwise Spartan space. A wall calendar near the refrigerator had doctor's appointments circled in red, these medical commitments taking up more days than not. The kitchen light flickered, occasionally casting uneven shadows across the girls' serious faces as they arranged their money in neat piles. $215, Emma announced, her voice flat with disappointment despite her attempt to hide it. She smoothed a crumpled bill with careful fingers, adding it to the largest stack. "Plus the $5 from Mrs. Peterson for weeding her garden yesterday," Sophia added, her voice carrying a spark of hope that made the reality even more painful. Emma nodded, making the mental calculation instantly. "And the $500 from Mr. Haddad," she said, almost whispering the name, as if saying it too loudly might make the miraculous encounter disappear like a dream upon waking. She placed all the bills in a jar labeled "Mom's Surgery" in childish handwriting, multicolored hearts drawn around the letters. The amount, $720, still fell far short of what they needed, but it was significantly more than they had this morning. Sophia slid off her chair and opened the refrigerator, the light inside revealing nearly empty shelves, a half-gallon of milk, condiments, a few apples, a loaf of bread. Her stomach growled audibly. "Should we order pizza?" she suggested hesitantly. The word pizza carrying the weight of a long-denied luxury. "We have enough now, right?" The question was less about pizza and more about whether they could finally allow themselves a moment of normalcy, a brief respite from the constant worry. Emma stood, her posture rigid with responsibility, far beyond her years. "No," she said firmly, though her own stomach clenched with hunger. "Every dollar counts." She reached past her sister, taking a familiar blue box of macaroni and cheese from a cabinet that held little else. The box was dented on one side, bought on sale at the discount grocery store where their aunt worked. "We have this," Emma said, her tone leaving no room for argument. The disappointment on Sophia's face was quickly masked, but not before Emma caught it. Her expression softened as she filled a pot with water. "We can have hot chocolate after," she offered, as compensation. With the mini marshmallows Aunt Linda brought on Sunday, Sophia brightened visibly. "Really? The whole bag?" "Half," Emma amended, practical even in indulgence. "We should save some for tomorrow." As Emma prepared their simple meal, steam rising from the pot, Sophia wandered into the living room. Children's books, a few novels, and family photos filled a small bookshelf. Crayons and drawing paper were stacked neatly on a coffee table, evidence of attempts to maintain childhood normalcy amid their increasingly adult concerns. Sophia stared at the empty space on the top shelf where Evangeline had sat for as long as either girl could remember. A faded rectangle marked the doll's absence, the surrounding dust undisturbed while the doll's spot was clean. "Mom's going to notice," she called to the kitchen, her voice tinged with worry. The empty spot where Evangeline was? Emma turned, wooden spoon in hand, orange cheese powder dusting her fingers. "We'll tell her the truth," she replied, though her voice lacked conviction. "She told us never to sell Evangeline," Sophia reminded. Her. Anxiety creeping into her voice. "No matter what, she made us promise that day in the hospital." Emma turned back to the stove, stirring more vigorously than necessary, the scrape of spoon against pot, filling the silence as she fought for an answer that would ease both her sister's conscience and her own. "She also told us to take care of each other," she said finally, her voice tight with emotion she rarely displayed. "That's what we're doing." The words hung in the air, a child's attempt to rationalize an impossible choice. When Emma spoke again, her voice was softer. "We couldn't just do nothing, Soph. We had to try something." Sophia traced the empty spot, with her finger creating a line in the dust. "I know," she admitted, "but I keep thinking about Great-Grandma Rose and how she brought Evangeline all the way from Vienna. And now she's gone." "Mr. Haddad seemed nice," Emma offered desperately, seeking silver linings. "He'll take good care of her." "You didn't have to sell her so fast," Sophia said suddenly, a hint of accusation in her voice. "You didn't even let me say goodbye properly." The admission struck Emma like a physical blow. Her shoulders, which had remained strong through months of their mother's illness, through countless disappointments and adult responsibilities thrust upon them too soon, began to shake slightly with suppressed sobs. Sophia, seeing her sister's unusual display of emotion, moved to her side. She silently rested her head against Emma's shoulder, offering comfort in the way they had learned to do for each other in the absence of their mother's constant presence. "I'm sorry," Emma whispered, the wooden spoon still clutched in her hand. "I just wanted to get the money before he changed his mind, before something went wrong again." Her voice carried the weight of previous disappointments, previous plans that had fallen through, previous hopes dashed. "We'll get her back someday," she promised, as much to herself as to her sister. "When Mom gets better, we'll save up and find Mr. Haddad. He has to be important. Did you see his car? Maybe he has a website or something?" Sophia nodded against her shoulder, accepting this unlikely promise because she needed to believe in something. "Do you think he'll take care of her? Make sure she doesn't get dusty or broken?" "He paid $500 for her," Emma reasoned, logical even in grief. "People take care of valuable things." The doorbell rang, its harsh buzz startling them. Both. They froze, exchanging alarmed glances. "Are we expecting anyone?" Sophia whispered, anxiety immediately replacing sorrow. Emma shook her head, a cold knot forming in her stomach. Had Mr. Haddad followed them? Had he realized Evangeline wasn't worth what he'd paid? Had Aunt Linda somehow found out they'd skipped school? The possibilities, all negative, raced through her mind. She moved cautiously to the door, standing on tiptoe to see through the peephole. The fisheye lens distorted the image, but she could make out their next-door neighbor, Mrs. Conway, 70s. The elderly woman clutched a covered dish, her silver hair protected from the rain by a plastic bonnet. Emma's shoulders sagged with relief as she opened the door. Mrs. Conway stood in the hallway, a casserole dish in her gnarled hands. Steam, escaping from beneath the foil covering. "Thought you two might be hungry," she said warmly, the wrinkles around her eyes deepening as she smiled. Lasagna, still hot from the oven. The rich aroma of tomato sauce and cheese filled the modest apartment, making both children's stomachs growl in unison. "Thank you, Mrs. Conway," Emma said gratefully, stepping back to allow the woman inside. Mrs. Conway glanced past her, scanning the apartment with the practiced eye of someone who had raised 3 children of her own. "Where's your Aunt Linda tonight?" She stepped inside without waiting for an invitation, familiarity suggesting this was a common occurrence. "She had to work double shifts this week at the hospital," Sophia explained, taking the casserole reverently, carrying it to the kitchen. Counter where the pot of macaroni steamed, now forgotten. Mrs. Conway frowned, the lines in her face deepening. "Again? You two are alone too much." There was no accusation in her tone, only concern. She noticed Emma's reddened eyes, the damp hair from their time in the rain, and the empty spot on the shelf where Evangeline had always sat. Her gaze lingered on this last detail, but she said nothing, moving instead to help Sophia transfer the lasagna to plates. "I saw you at the fair today," she mentioned casually, reaching into the drawer where she knew the silverware was kept, "through my window when I was driving past." The twins exchanged worried glances, caught in their secret mission. "You sold?" "Your mother's doll," Mrs. Conway said gently. It wasn't a question. Emma's defenses rose immediately, her chin lifting slightly. "We had to," she said, her voice defensive. "For the surgery. Mom needs it." Mrs. Conway sighed, abandoning the pretense of casual conversation. She set down the serving spoon and pulled Emma into a hug that the girl resisted only momentarily before melting into the embrace. "Oh, honey, I know," the older woman said softly. "Your mama would understand." "Really?" Sophia asked hopefully, approaching to join the hug. Mrs. Conway reached out her other arm, including the second twin in her embrace. "She'd be proud of how you're looking out for each other," she assured them. "That's what family does." She released them, looking around the apartment more thoroughly, noting the nearly empty refrigerator and the piles of medical bills partially hidden under a newspaper on the counter. "Now, you two eat this while it's hot," she instructed, her tone leaving no room for argument. "And call me if you need anything at all." She tucked a strand of hair behind Emma's ear in a motherly gesture. "You're not alone in this," she whispered. "Remember that." After she left, the twins sat at the table with the lasagna between them, steam rising from the generous portions they'd served themselves. The macaroni and cheese sat forgotten on the stove, its bland predictability no match for Mrs. Conway's homemade offering. "Do you think Mom's awake?" Sophia asked between mouthfuls. "At the hospital?" She glanced at the clock. 7:45 p.m. Visiting hours would be ending soon. "Probably," Emma replied, checking the time. "We could call her after dinner." "What do we tell her about the money?" Sophia asked, setting down her fork as the weight of their actions settled on her small shoulders once more. Emma served herself a second helping, thoughtfully chewing as she considered the question. When she answered, her voice carried the weight of decision. "The truth," she said finally. "Most of it anyway." "But not about Evangeline?" Sophia clarified. Emma shook her head, determination hardening her features. "Not yet. She has enough to worry about." "It would just make her sad," Sophia agreed, relieved not to have to share their most painful decision. "We're doing this for her," Emma said, more to convince herself than her sister. "She'll understand someday." Outside their window, the Tesla remained parked discreetly across the street. Inside, Asim passed Fareed a folder containing everything he'd been able to find about Sarah Miller and her children in the past hour. The next morning, sunlight filtered through the thin curtains of Sarah Miller's hospital room, creating patterns on the linoleum floor. Sarah sat propped up in bed, color slightly improved after a night of relatively restful sleep. She leafed through a magazine, without really seeing the pages, her mind elsewhere. The door opened and Sarah looked up, expecting a nurse with her morning medication. Instead, she stared in disbelief at Dr. Reynolds, the hospital administrator, Gloria Peterson, 60s, and a serious woman in an impeccably tailored business suit, Diana Mehta, 40s, who held a leather portfolio identical to Fareed's. "Good morning, Ms. Miller," the administrator began with uncharacteristic cheerfulness. "We've had a breakthrough with your case." Sarah's expression immediately turned suspicious, years of disappointment having taught her to expect the worst from the healthcare system. "What kind of breakthrough?" she asked cautiously. "All expenses covered," the administrator announced with obvious satisfaction. "The Boston specialist, Dr. Gardner, is expecting you tomorrow. Private transportation has been arranged. Your treatment can begin immediately." Sarah's eyes narrowed, disbelief evident in her furrowed brow. "This can't be." "Right," she said slowly. "There has to be a mistake." She looked from one face to another, searching for the catch, the cruelty behind false hope. "No mistake, Ms. Miller," the administrator assured her. "You've been accepted into the Foundation's Special Cases Program, full coverage, including aftercare. And rehabilitation." Sarah pushed herself more upright in the bed, wincing slightly at the effort. "What foundation?" she demanded, her voice gaining strength from confusion and a lifetime of skepticism. "I didn't apply for anything. My insurance denied the claim 3 times. There were no appeals pending." The businesswoman stepped forward, her movements smooth and practiced. She slid a business card across the tray table. It was simple, elegant. Crescent Investment Partners, Fareed Haddad, CEO. The card featured a small crescent moon logo embossed in silver. "Mr. Haddad has established a foundation for families in medical crisis," Diana explained, her voice professional but not unkind. "Your situation matched our criteria perfectly." Sarah's hand shook as she took the card, staring at the embossed logo as if trying to extract meaning from its curved shape. "I don't understand," she said finally. "Why me? Out of thousands of people who need help?" Diana's smile remained perfectly calibrated, sympathetic but not pitying. "Our selection process is confidential, Ms. Miller, but I can assure you this is legitimate. All paperwork has been processed. The financial arrangements have been made. All you need to do is sign the consent forms." She produced several documents from her portfolio, placing them on the tray table alongside a pen with the same crescent moon logo. Sarah turned to Dr. Reynolds, searching his face for confirmation, for some explanation of this apparent miracle. "Is this real?" she asked directly. "Or am I having some kind of medication-induced hallucination?" Dr. Reynolds smiled, genuine excitement breaking through his usual professional reserve. "It's real, Sarah. Dr. Gardner in Boston is the best in the country for this procedure. This is the miracle we've been hoping for." His enthusiasm seemed genuine, but Sarah remained skeptical, years of disappointment having trained her to expect the worst. She picked up the documents, scanning the dense medical terminology and legal language with practiced eyes. "There's no catch?" she pressed. "No experimental treatment? No requirement that I become some kind of research subject?" Diana shook her head. "Standard treatment protocols, Ms. Miller. The Foundation simply removes the financial barriers." "And my children?" Sarah asked suddenly, her maternal instincts sensing a connection she couldn't yet articulate. "What do they have to do with this?" The question hung in the air for a moment, pointed and perceptive. Diana maintained her professional smile, but something flickered in her eyes. Surprise, perhaps, at Sarah's intuition. "I'm not aware of any connection with your children, Ms. Miller," she replied, her tone carefully neutral. "The selection was based on medical need and prognosis. Your case was referred to us by the hospital's social work department." Outside the room, Emma and Sophia pressed against the wall in the hallway, listening intently, their expressions a mix of hope and guilt. They had arrived at the hospital earlier than usual, drawn by a mysterious phone call to their aunt about good news for Sarah. "Should we tell her about Evangeline?" Sophia whispered, eyes wide with uncertainty. Maybe the doll really was lucky. Maybe selling her made this happen. Emma shook her head firmly, squeezing her sister's hand until her knuckles turned white. "Not yet," she whispered fiercely. "Let her believe it's just luck. If we tell her now, she might refuse the help." Inside the room, Sarah was signing documents with a trembling hand, each signature an act of faith against years of disappointment and institutional indifference to her suffering. "So I fly to Boston tomorrow?" she asked, still sounding bewildered by the sudden turn of events. "Just like that? A car will pick you up at 9 a.m., Diana confirmed, gathering the signed papers. "Your children are welcome to accompany you, of course. The foundation covers family accommodations during treatment." "My sister can watch them," Sarah decided after a moment's thought. "They've missed enough school already." She completed the final signature, pushing the papers away as if they might burn her, still not fully trusting this unexpected salvation. "I don't know who this Mr. Haddad is," she said softly, "but thank him for me." Diana smiled, tucking the documents back into her portfolio. "I certainly will." As Diana and the administrator left, Sarah turned to Dr. Reynolds, who remained behind, unable to contain his excitement at this development. "What are the odds this is some elaborate scam?" Sarah asked quietly. Dr. Reynolds chuckled, shaking his head. "Crescent Investment Partners is legitimate, very legitimate. Haddad is worth billions. His foundation funded our new pediatric wing last year." "Then why me?" Sarah persisted, unwilling to accept good fortune without questioning it. "Why my case? There are thousands of more deserving patients. Some people need to do good with their money," Dr. Reynolds replied, checking her vitals one more time and making notes on her chart. "You're the beneficiary. Don't question it too hard." He patted her hand gently. "Sarah, sometimes miracles happen. Except this one." Sarah looked at the business card again, tracing the embossed logo with her finger. The gesture reminded her of Emma, who had the same habit when thinking deeply. Outside, in the hallway, the twins silently high-fived each other, careful to stay out of sight of the room's window. Their faces glowed with the triumph of children who have taken on the adult world and, against all odds, emerged victorious. "It worked," Emma whispered, years seeming to fall away, allowing the child she truly was to shine through briefly. "Do you think it's because we sold Evangeline?" Sophia asked, her belief in magic and luck undiminished by their hardships. "Like she was watching over us?" "Maybe," Emma conceded, momentarily willing to entertain her sister's fanciful thinking in the wake of such unexpected good news. "Will we ever see her again?" Sophia wondered, suddenly wistful despite their success. The question brought Emma back to reality. Her smile faded slightly, responsibility settling back onto her small shoulders. "Mom's more important than any doll," she said firmly. "I know," Sophia nodded, "but I miss her too," Emma admitted softly, the confession surprising them both. She wrapped an arm around her sister's shoulders, both staring at their mother through the doorway, hope and loss balanced precariously in their young hearts. 2 weeks later, in Boston, Fareed stood by the window of his penthouse, tumbler of amber liquid in hand. The glass was crystal, the whiskey aged and expensive. His reflection was superimposed over the city view, giving him a ghostly, transparent quality. He had loosened his tie, a rare concession to comfort in a man defined by control. Evangeline the doll sat on a glass table behind him, still in the leather case, now open. The porcelain face caught the fading light, giving her painted features an almost lifelike glow. She seemed out of place in this sterile environment, a splash of history and sentiment in a space deliberately devoid of both. His phone rang, the sound harsh in the silence. He answered, putting it on speaker. "Yes," he answered, his voice betraying no emotion. "The procedure was completed 2 hours ago, sir," Asim reported from the hospital where he had been stationed all day. "Successful, according to the surgicals. Team," Farid exhaled slowly, a tension releasing from his shoulders that he hadn't realized he was carrying. "And her prognosis?" he asked, taking another sip of his whiskey. "Very good. Dr. Gardner says she should make a full recovery with proper follow-up care, which has already been arranged through the foundation." Farid took another sip from his glass, looking at the doll's reflection in his whiskey. In the amber liquid, the doll's face seemed to shift expression slightly, a trick of the light that nevertheless felt significant. "The children?" he asked, his voice softening on the word, revealing a vulnerability he allowed only in private. "Still with their aunt in Michigan," Asim replied. "They've been calling the hospital every day, twice yesterday. The nurses say they're quite persistent." "Good," Farid said quietly. The single word contained multitudes, approval, relief, and something deeper and more personal than his usual business concerns. "Sir, the board meeting is in 30 minutes, Asim reminded him. "They're expecting an update on the Dubai project. The investment committee has questions about the timeline." "Yes, I'll be ready," Farid replied, distracted by his thoughts. He disconnected the call and moved to the table where Evangeline sat. He carefully picked up the doll, studying its delicate features. His large hands, accustomed to signing contracts and shaking on multi-million-dollar deals, were surprisingly gentle as they straightened the doll's tiny bonnet. "Evangeline," he said softly, addressing the doll directly, "that's what they called you." From his wallet he removed a worn photograph. The corner was frayed from handling. It showed a young girl, Layla, with the same dark eyes as Farid, smiling. From a hospital bed, a wooden camel toy clutched in her thin arms. "I was too late for you," he whispered to the photograph, always running to the next deal, the next meeting. He touched the photo gently, tracing the outline of the smiling face. Not this time. The doorbell rang, jarring in the silent apartment. Farid quickly put away the photograph, composing himself. The businessman's mask slid back into place, though not quite perfectly. He opened the door to find Diana Mehta, dressed in a different suit but wearing the same expression of professional efficiency. Her eyes took in his loosened tie, the whiskey, glass, noting the deviations from his normal, impeccable appearance. "The board is asking questions about the foundation, Mr. Haddad," she said without preamble, stepping inside. "This is the third case this month that didn't go through normal channels." She entered without waiting for an invitation, comfortable in her role as his right hand. "Let them ask," Farid replied evenly, moving to the bar to refill his whiskey, without offering her one. They knew each other too well for such pretenses. "Sir, with respect," Diana pressed, "you can't save everyone. And the way you're selecting these cases, it's not systematic, it's personal," he supplied, raising an eyebrow. The word hung in the air between them, loaded with implication. Diana chose her next words carefully. "I was going to say impulsive," she corrected. "The foundation has established protocols, medical committees. These recent cases bypass all of that." Farid moved to pour her a drink despite her usual refusal. She declined with a subtle gesture. "The board is concerned about resource allocation," she continued, "about precedent, about sustainability." "They're concerned about their quarterly bonuses," Farid countered dismissively, "about appearances, about control. They're concerned." "About you," Diana admitted finally. This candid admission caused Farid to turn, studying her with new interest. Diana had been with him for 15 years, her loyalty unquestioned. If she was expressing concern, others must be whispering more. "Seriously? How is she?" he asked, abruptly changing the subject. "Ms. Miller. Have you seen her?" The sudden pivot didn't surprise Diana. She was used to his conversational tactics when topics became too personal. "She's recovering well," Diana reported. "Better than expected. But she's asking questions about you, about why her case was selected. People always question good fortune, Fareed dismissed with a wave of his hand. It makes them uncomfortable. She's determined, Diana warned, smart, not easily distracted. She was an art teacher before she got sick. This detail caught Fareed's attention. The glass paused halfway to his lips. An artist? Diana nodded, seeing she had found something that interested him. She makes these delicate paper birds for her children, even with her hands shaking from the medication. She reached into her bag, producing a small origami crane. She asked me to give this to you as thanks. Fareed took the paper creation, turning it carefully in his hands. The craftsmanship was exquisite despite the evidence of trembling in some of the folds. Layla used to fold these, he said quietly, more to himself than to Diana. She learned from a book I bought her in Tokyo. Diana's expression softened. She was one of the few people who knew about his daughter. I'd like to see her, Fareed announced suddenly. Ms. Miller, from a distance. Is that wise? Diana asked, concern evident in her voice. The board already thinks— Probably not, Fareed interrupted with rare candor. He set down his glass and picked up his coat from where it was draped over a chair. The board meeting can wait, he decided, checking his watch. Fareed, Diana said, using his first name in a rare display of personal concern, you can't keep canceling. They're already talking about succession planning, about your state of mind, about your judgment. Let them talk, he replied with finality. He slipped the origami crane carefully into his pocket, next to the photograph of his daughter. Later. That day snow fell gently outside the Boston Medical Facility, the flakes catching the glow from the hospital windows. The building rose like a beacon against the darkening winter sky, its shape softened by the falling snow. Fareed stood by a window in the waiting room, watching the snowflakes swirl and dance. His normally imposing presence was subdued, almost hesitant. He had been there for hours, unmoving, a statue among the ebb and flow of visitors, nurses, and doctors. Are you waiting for someone, sir? A voice interrupted his thoughts. Fareed turned to see a nurse, 30s, looking at him curiously. Her scrubs were decorated with cartoon animals, a cheerful contrast to the hospital's sterile environment. Just enjoying the snow, he replied smoothly, the casual lie coming easily after years of business negotiations. We don't get much where I'm from. First snow of the season, the nurse smiled. Always feels special. She moved on, continuing her rounds. Fareed checked his watch, a subtle gesture of impatience, then looked up sharply as a doctor emerged from a corridor, removing his surgical mask. Fareed tensed, recognition and anxiety briefly visible in his normally composed features. The doctor consulted with a colleague in hushed tones, not noticing Fareed's attention. Through their conversation, Fareed caught fragments. Miller and excellent prognosis and remarkable response. Fareed relaxed visibly, tension draining from his shoulders. He glanced toward the corridor where Sarah Miller's room must be, tempted to break his self-imposed rule of distance. Mr. Haddad? A voice called from behind him. Fareed turned, finding himself face-to-face with Dekar Gardner, straight 50s, the specialist he had personally selected for Sarah's case. The doctor seemed surprised to find his benefactor lurking in the waiting room. I didn't expect to see you here, Dr. Gardner said, clearly confused. Your office said you were in a board meeting. I had a moment free, Fareed explained smoothly. Thought I'd check on our investment. The clinical term deliberately masked his personal interest. Ms. Miller is doing remarkably well, Dr. Gardner reported enthusiastically. The procedure was challenging but successful. Her heart is responding better than we anticipated. Good, Fareed nodded, relief disguised as satisfaction. That's good. She's been asking about you, the doctor mentioned, about the foundation. Fareed's expression closed slightly. The foundation prefers to remain in the background, doctor. Our work isn't about recognition. Of course, Dr. Gardner nodded knowingly. A commotion down the hallway drew their attention. Children's voices, excited and breathless, echoed off the sterile walls. "Mom! Mom, we're here!" Emma's voice called out. Fareed instinctively stepped back, partially concealing himself behind a structural column. Dr. Gardner noticed, but said nothing. Emma and Sophia rushed down the hallway toward their mother's room, their Aunt Linda, 40s, following more sedately. They carried handmade cards and a small potted plant. Their faces glowed with excitement and relief. Fareed watched them pass, unnoticed. In their happiness, they were blind to anything but the promise of seeing their mother. As they disappeared around a corner, Fareed's phone buzzed with messages. He wouldn't answer yet. "Those are her children," Dr. Gardner explained unnecessarily. "Twins. Quite remarkable young people. They've been calling every day for updates." "Yes," Fareed agreed softly. "They are remarkable." He watched the empty space where they had disappeared, something like longing briefly visible in his eyes. From his briefcase, he removed a package wrapped in simple brown paper. 6 months later, in a modest but cheerful kitchen in Michigan, Sarah, healthy, now and regaining her strength daily, prepared dinner while Emma set the table. Color had returned to Sarah's face, and though she moved more carefully than before her surgery, she moved with increasing confidence. A canvas on an easel in the corner showed she had returned to her artwork, a landscape taking shape under her. Recovering hands. "Sophia," Emma called toward the living room. "Dinner in 5 minutes." Sophia burst into the kitchen, waving an envelope. "Mom, there's a package!" Sarah turned from the stove, wiping her hands on a dish towel. "What is it? Did you order something?" The twins exchanged glances, equally mystified. "It's addressed to all of us," Sophia reported, reading the label. They gathered around the table as Sarah opened the brown paper package carefully. When she lifted the lid of the box inside, she gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. Inside lay Evangeline the doll, restored to pristine condition. Her dress had been professionally cleaned, the tiny rips in the lace collar mended, the faded blue ribbon replaced with a perfect match in new silk. She looked better than she had in decades. Beneath the doll was a note on heavy cream stationery. "Some things should stay in families forever," Sarah read aloud, her voice trembling slightly. "My daughter would have agreed." The twins stared at each other in shocked disbelief. Emma reached out to touch the doll's face, her eyes wide with wonder. "How did she come back to us?" she whispered. Sarah looked at her daughters curiously. "What do you mean, back?" The girls exchanged guilty glances, realizing their secret was about to be revealed. Through the window behind them, a black Tesla pulled away quietly from the curb. Inside the car, Fareed removed the photograph of his daughter from his wallet. For the first time in years, he smiled at it before carefully placing it in an elegant silver frame on the dashboard. The car drove into the setting sun as a new origami crane made from the hospital bill marked "Paid in Full" flew from the twins' open window, carried on the spring breeze. Outro. Gentle music. Remember to like, subscribe, and hit that notification bell for more heartwarming stories. If this touched your heart, share it with someone who needs to hear it today. See you in the next video. Arab billionaire watches twin girls selling their doll to save their mother. Their lives change forever. In the pouring rain at a once bustling county fair, 2 small figures huddled under a leaking awning, their shoulders pressed together for warmth. Emma and Sophia Miller, 7-year-old twin girls with matching blue jackets and identical heart-shaped faces, were soaked to the bone. Their matching auburn ponytails hung limp from the relentless drizzle, and their second-hand tennis shoes were darkened with puddle water. Between them, protected from the rain by Emma's school jacket, sat a beautiful antique porcelain doll in an elaborate Victorian dress of faded blue silk. The doll's painted face, with rosebud lips and sapphire eyes, carried the dignified expression of an artifact that had witnessed a century of human triumphs and tragedies. A handwritten cardboard sign, its edges curling from moisture, read, "Vintage doll, $500 for mom's surgery." The twins had carefully positioned their makeshift stand near the fair entrance that morning, when hope still felt possible. Now 8 hours later, as the day surrendered to early evening and the rain showed no sign of mercy, that hope flickered like a candle in the wind. "Nobody's even slowing down anymore, Em," whispered Sophia, her small hands red from cold, her usually cheerful voice cracking with disappointment. "We've been here for hours and hours." Emma, the older twin by 12 minutes, a fact she never let her sister forget, squeezed Sophia's shoulder. Unlike her sister, Emma rarely displayed emotion. Even now, as their desperate plan crumbled around them, her face remained a mask of determination. "Someone will come," she insisted, adjusting the plastic tarp they'd salvaged from a discarded carnival booth. "They have to." The determination in her voice didn't match the uncertainty in her eyes. Sophia caught this contradiction. The twins often sensed each other's true feelings beneath words, but said nothing. Someone had to believe, and today it was Emma's turn to be the strong one. Across the fairground, the last food vendors closed their stalls. The smell of fried dough and caramel apples, tortures to the hungry girls, faded under the pervasive scent of wet asphalt. The tinny carousel music, which had provided a surreal soundtrack to their vigil, finally silenced, leaving only the steady drumming of rain and occasional thunder. "Maybe we could ask for less money," Sophia suggested, her voice small. "Like 300? Emma shook her head firmly. Dr. Reynolds said the special medicine costs at least 800 plus the hospital fees. We already have 200 saved from our birthday money and Mom's jar." Sophia's stomach growled audibly. They hadn't eaten since the peanut butter sandwiches Aunt Linda had made them for breakfast, before dropping them at the school bus stop, believing they were actually going to school, not skipping to come to the fair. "When Mom gets better," Emma continued, almost to herself, "she'll go back to teaching art classes. Remember how she used to come home with paint on her hands? Even her fingernails would be different colors." Sophia smiled at the memory. "Blue and yellow, and sometimes purple, and she'd chase us around the apartment, threatening to turn us into living paintings if we didn't clean our room." The shared recollection warmed them momentarily, before reality settled back like the damp chill in their bones. Half a mile across town, in the sterile confines of Community Hospital, Sarah Miller lay in bed 307, pale against white sheets that had been washed so many times they had lost all softness. Medical monitors beeped steadily beside her, the electronic pulse a poor substitute for the healthy heartbeat that her body was struggling to maintain. A young nurse adjusted her IV drip without making eye contact, already behind schedule on her rounds. Sarah's fingers, once steady enough to create detailed watercolor illustrations for children's books, now trembled as she folded a delicate paper crane. A half-finished collection of origami animals decorated her bedside table. Blue for Emma, pink for Sophia, waiting for the twins' weekend visit. The late afternoon sun briefly penetrated the clouds, casting a golden rectangle across her hospital bed. In this momentary illumination, the hollowness of her cheeks and the premature lines around her eyes became more apparent. At 35, Sarah looked a decade older, the aggressive medication having exacted its price on her once vibrant beauty. Dr. Reynolds entered, clipboard in hand, his face carrying the professionally neutral expression that doctors perfect over years of delivering difficult news. "Ms. Miller, about the specialist consultation," he began. "I've got 2 jobs and amazing kids, doctors." "Reynolds," Sarah interrupted, her voice stronger than her body suggested, "what I don't have is better insurance or a miracle." The doctor hesitated, then placed a brochure on her bed. The glossy paper featured palm trees and smiling medical professionals. "Medical tourism options," the title read. "The procedure in Boston." He cleared his throat. "There are alternatives. Other countries where the cost would be a fraction." Sarah's fingers crushed the paper crane she'd been folding. "You mean places where the success rate is also a fraction? Where I'd be separated from my girls for months?" "Doctor." Reynolds had the decency to look uncomfortable. I'm just trying to present all options, Ms. Miller. The specialist treatment protocol has shown promising results, but it costs more than I'll make in 3 years, Sarah finished for him. I understand, Doctor. Believe me, I understand the economics all too well. As he left, Sarah smoothed out the crumpled crane, carefully refolding the paper wings. The small creation took on additional weight in her hands, a symbol of hope, folded from the very paperwork that documented her diminishing options. Back at the fairground, the rain intensified, pelting the nearly abandoned stalls with cold determination. Lightning flashed in the distance, followed by rolling thunder. Emma counted silently. 1,000 to 1,000, reaching 7 before the thunder arrived. The storm's getting closer, she said, mathematical even in crisis. Sophia wiped water from the doll's porcelain face with her sleeve, her movements gentle and reverent despite her exhaustion. "I'm sorry, Evangeline," she whispered to the doll, as if it were a living being who could feel the indignity of being displayed for sale in the rain. "I've got you." She carefully tucked a stray thread back into the doll's lace collar, smoothing the worn blue fabric with fingers that had inherited her mother's artistic touch. The porcelain face stared back, frozen in a perpetual expression of serene dignity that seemed to transcend their desperate circumstances. "Remember how Great-Grandma Rose carried you all the way from Europe?" Sophia continued her one-sided conversation with the doll. "Mom said she wouldn't leave without you, even when they barely had room for clothes." Emma watched her sister with a mixture of annoyance and envy. Sophia had always been able to escape into imagination, to find comfort in make-believe. Emma, by contrast, lived firmly in reality, where dolls were objects and fairy tales never materialized when you needed them most.